Hello everyone. Back by popular demand, it is another seedling fertilizer test. Earlier this spring, I tested out 9 different fertilizers on my cauliflower seedlings, and I had so many requests for other fertilizers that I decided to set up another round of testing, this time using tomato seedlings. To skip over all the details of the experiment and go straight to the results, I do have the chapters marked for your convenience, though I hope you'll stick around for the whole video. So first, the details on how I set this experiment up. I selected 9 different fertilizers to test, and some of these are repeats from the cauliflower experiment, and some of them are from your suggestions. And of course, I have my control, which was only given water. Like the cauliflower experiment, I wanted to grow in a medium which had little to no inherent nutritional value. But this time, instead of the coconut core, I went with a mix which was based off Cornell University's original soilless potting mix. I used 3 gallons of peat, 3 gallons of perlite, and 2.6 ounces of lime mixed together. I sowed 2 50-cell trays, 100 cells in total, on April 1st, with my 9 tests plus 1 control. That allowed for 10 cells devoted to each test. I used the same variety of hybrid tomato for everything, Ruby Dawn. Now for the most part, and I'll cover the exceptions later, I fed the seedlings per the instructions on the manufacturer's label. I know based on the last video that some will argue that this test isn't fair because the NPK ratios vary so much on each fertilizer. But I'm looking at this as a typical consumer who is simply going to use a fertilizer based on the instructions they are given. You could, of course, adjust these to make them more equal, but in my mind, that kind of defeats the purpose of the test. For the application frequency, most of these fertilizers called for application ranging from every 2 to 4 weeks. I tried to find a happy medium and ended up feeding most groups 3 times, May 4th, May 20th, and then again on June 10th, which was also when I upgraded 2 seedlings of each into larger pots. You may notice the large gap between when I started the seedlings and the first fertilizer application, almost a month. Typically, I start to feed seedlings when they have 1 to 2 sets of true leaves and are several inches tall. In this case, I waited quite a bit longer. Tomatoes tend to grow like weeds, and for this experiment, I wanted to stress them just a little bit before giving them that first fertilizer application, just to really show what some of these fertilizers are capable of. This tendency of tomatoes, especially indeterminate tomatoes, to grow like weeds is also the reason that I spread out my applications quite a bit. If I had applied fertilizer more frequently, I would have ended up with tomato seedlings approximately the size of small trees. When I fed each group of seedlings, I wanted to avoid any risk of cross-contamination, for lack of a better term, between each group. So when I fed them, I separated each out from the rest of the trays and fed and watered them, then allowed them to sit in the runoff to soak up whatever they could. I then moved the separate tray to finish draining. I used any liquid runoff to feed my houseplants, rinsed off my trays, containers, utensils, and then started on the next one. As I mentioned, on June 10th, I up-potted 2 seedlings from each group into larger containers. This up-potting process is something I always do with my tomato seedlings. It allows me to bury my seedlings deep and really get some good root development before I transplant them out. And I used these root pruning style containers, which I really like for tomato seedlings. Now with my up-potted seedlings, I did actually use straight coconut core as my medium in these pots. Mainly because I ran out of my other medium, and again, coconut core is a planting medium with no inherent nutritional value. As of filming this video, it is July 6th. These seedlings are quite a bit older than I would ever typically transplant tomatoes. So these are 3 months old, and I usually aim for transplanting seedlings right around a month to a month and a half old. But similar to my cauliflower seedlings, I feel that this stretched timeline really gives us a good picture of what these fertilizers can do. So now let's take a look at the specific fertilizers that I used for this experiment. The first group, as I mentioned, is my control, and these seedlings received water only. For group 2, I used AgroThrive fertilizer, and this is a repeat. This is actually the winner from the cauliflower seedling trial. And this AgroThrive formulation is a 335, and it is a biofertilizer derived from corn steep liquor, which is a byproduct of corn wet milling, fermented fish byproducts, and sulfate of potash. Now, in the last video, I had quite a few folks ask me why I didn't use the AgroThrive general purpose fertilizer. And the simple answer is I had the fruit and flower on hand, not the general purpose. I actually talked to a rep from the AgroThrive company and asked him about this, like, should I be using the general purpose for seedlings or is this okay? And he said they will both work. Either formulation is fine. And of course, he was happy to hear about the results with the cauliflower. Now, the application instructions actually say to apply this one once a week, but I find that this works so effectively that that once a week application is almost overkill. So I only did the 3 feedings with this one. I did the same with my cauliflower test. Now, in my cauliflower experiment, I did smell notes on each one of these fertilizers, and I will do the same this time. Some people were like, why do we care what it smells like? I do, because if I'm using fertilizer, especially for starting seedlings in the house, I do not want something that's going to stink up my entire living room. So this smells pretty important to me. But I already know from the last video, this one actually has a really pleasant smell. It's kind of like a molasses soy sauce, that umami. I know that's a flavor, not a smell, but it's just that really unique kind of, I know it's weird, but I almost like want to dump this on stir fry. Don't eat it. This is not for human consumption, but it actually has a pleasant smell. The next group of seedlings received Neptune's Harvest, and this one was, I think, probably the most requested fertilizer that people asked for in the comments on that cauliflower test. This is a very popular organic, all-natural liquid fertilizer that's been around for years and years. I know a lot of people have had success with this one, but it is a 2-3-1 ratio, and it is derived from fish protein hydrolysate and phosphoric acid as a stabilizer. It also has seaweed and potassium hydroxide made from fresh North Atlantic fish and a type of kelp, which I cannot pronounce. So I'm going to pop the botanical name up on the screen here. Now, on the Neptune instructions, there's actually no instructions specifically for seedlings. So I use the houseplant application rate, which is 1 tablespoon per gallon of water. Again, this is for houseplants, but it says to apply every week, which I did not do. I applied 3 different times with this fertilizer. Knowing what I know now and going through this whole experiment, I probably should have been doing every week, but we will take a look at that in a minute. Now, smell notes. A lot of you are familiar with Neptune's Harvest. And it is not the worst. So it's not the stinkiest fish and seaweed based fertilizer by far, but it definitely smells fishy. I don't find that at this application rate, it really stunk up my house too badly. Watering with it every week might, I'm not sure, but it's tolerable. The next group, this was another one that was requested by a lot of folks. And this was one, surprisingly, I had not been familiar with prior to you all asking for it. And it's Alaska brand fish fertilizer. This is a 5-1-1 ratio, and it's derived from fish solubles and phosphoric acid. And again, no specific instructions for seedlings here, but I used the vegetable bedding plants bulbs annuals application rate, and this one is to be applied every 3 weeks. So smell notes here. Yeah, it smells like straight up dead fish. This was real stinky in the house. Luckily, it was warm enough that I was able to move these seedlings out to the greenhouse pretty early on. Not such a problem out there. This would be one. I know I've heard from folks who say they have problems with raccoons digging up their gardens when they use these types of fertilizers. I think with this potent, strong fish smell, this would definitely draw in raccoons. So it's just something to be aware of. Next up, another one that was new to me. This was one that was requested by a few folks. This is Dynamic Organic Mater Magic Fertilizer. This is an 855 formulation derived from meat meal, hydrolyzed feather meal, bone meal, blood meal, and sulfate of potash. Now this one, again, no specific rate for small young seedlings. They do have a broadcast rate, which is what I used, 2 tablespoons per square foot. And I just sprinkled these pellets pellets on the top of my planting medium and watered it in well. So I applied these at the first feeding that I did for all the plants. I then didn't feed again until that last feeding. So when I up potted my seedlings here, I mixed some of this into the coconut coir. I also gave my smaller seedlings another top dress at that time also. Now, smell notes on this one. Given all of the ingredients in this, I would expect it to be kind of funky, but it really doesn't have much of a smell at all. It reminds me a little of alfalfa pellets, but it's not bad. And I didn't notice any smell when I actually used it watered into the planting medium. Next up is the Dr. Earth. This was a brand that did well for my cauliflower seedlings. For this test, I'm using the Root Zone starter plant food. It's a 0:2 ratio, and it's derived from digested food materials and digested food byproducts. Smell notes here. Very similar actually to the Agro Thrive. It kind of has that molasses soy sauce smell, not unpleasant at all. This is a repeat from the last test. This is the Espoma Organic Grow All-Purpose Plant Food. And I had pretty abysmal results with my cauliflower seedlings. But what a lot of people questioned was if I actually got a bad batch of Espoma for that test. So I did end up buying a fresh bottle for this go around. Now this is a 2:2 ratio, and it's derived from hydrolyzed poultry manure, hydrolyzed soy protein, hydrolyzed fish protein, bone meal, kelp extract, plus beneficial microbes, humic acid, dextrose, sucrose, and maltodextrin. Now, smell notes. This one had a really stinky smell the last time. And it's still not my favorite. It is really weird because it's like stink covered up with perfume. And I don't know if that's like the maltodextrin or some of the sweet things that are in here that are making this smell almost sweet and perfumey, but then there's like a stank underneath it, which is not pleasant. I will say though that this batch smells less unpleasant than the prior batch that I had. And as you probably know, I am not a fan, but I had to do the Miracle Grow again in this test. I actually had a few people tell me that the Miracle Grow formulation I used in the last video, which was the transplant formulation, was not what I should have been using for seedlings. So this time I am using the water-soluble all-purpose plant food. This is a 24-8-16 synthetic fertilizer derived from ammonium sulfate, potassium phosphate, urea, and more. I'll pop the full ingredient list up here on the screen. And if you watch the cauliflower test, you know how poorly that formulation performed. So we're giving this one a try. We're going to see what it does. Another popular request was the Revive RX from MI Gardener. This is a 911 formulation derived from liquid kelp, urea, humic and fulvic acid, and more. Again, I'll pop the full ingredient list up here on the screen. And this one actually just says apply as needed. So I ended up doing the 3 feedings, and smell notes here. Kind of has that slightly mineral smell as I'm used to with most fulvic and humic acid supplements. Also has that smell of urea. But again, I didn't notice any smell after I watered this into my plants. Now, a slight aside, but if anyone from the MI Gardener team happens to watch this video, I'm begging you, as a person over a certain age, please, for the love of God, make this font larger. This is real hard to read. I had to get my 12-year-old to read this for me. So yeah. And finally, I did another synthetic formulation. This is Gardens Alive's Seedling Boost. This is a 15:3:18 ratio, and it's derived from ammonium nitrate, ammonium phosphate, potassium nitrate, and more. Pop the ingredients up here. My old favorite seedling fertilizer, which I've been trying to replace, was actually from Gardens Alive. Now, it was a naturally derived molasses-based liquid fertilizer. They don't carry it anymore, so I thought I would give this one a try. Now, with this one, again, I did not follow the application frequency verbatim. That is because this is formulated for use with their seed starting kit, which is essentially a hydroponic setup where you fill the bottom reservoir tray with the fertilizer water mix every couple of weeks. So this actually has you adding to the water each time you fill up that reservoir tray or at each watering. In the growing medium I used here, I have to water much more frequently, so I was not applying this at every watering. I just did the 3 application times. Now the part that you've all been waiting for, I'm sure, the results of all of these fertilizers. And I'm really excited because as with the cauliflower seedlings, I've been able to watch the top growth all along, but with these larger up-potted seedlings, today is the first time that I'm seeing the root development, which is the really important part. I'll show you first. Here is what the seedlings looked like before I up-potted them. The Thrive, Espoma, and Dr. Earth gave me the tallest seedlings. But really, I was happiest overall with the Mater Magic seedlings. They had a nice size. I don't necessarily want my tomato seedlings to be enormously tall. They had great color and great root development. But let's look at these larger seedlings now. So first up, we have the control. This is pretty remarkable. This is 3 months of growth, and this is all we have. That color is not good. And let's look at the root development here. I have a feeling this is gonna make a mess. So there's hardly anything there, not enough roots to even hold this core block together. So next up, Thrive. These are so tall that I can't fit them all in the frame. But as I said earlier, height on tomato seedlings is not necessarily what I'm going after. I prefer good color, robust stems, good root development over just pure height. And honestly, for this whole experiment, the color on these Thrive fed tomatoes has not been the best. Now, it could be that the general purpose version would work a lot better on tomatoes. And these will absolutely perform once they're put in the ground. I just wish that that color was a richer green. But true test, let's look at the roots. Overall, I'm happy with that root development. And what I typically do with my tomato seedlings, anytime I transplant into the garden, I'm gonna bury these again at least this much deeper. So we're gonna develop roots all along this portion of the stem too. Next up, Neptune's Harvest. And you can see here why I said I should have been applying every week. The 3 applications that I did was just clearly not enough. These are a little larger than my control, but color is not any better. And for being 3 months old, these are frankly pathetic. Again, let's look at root development here. Yeah, really those roots, again, don't look much better than my control. Here is the Alaska fish fertilizer. And again, compare that growth to the Neptune's Harvest. These are fine. I wish that color was a little deeper green, but that root development is nice. And I actually like that these are not overwhelmingly tall. Now we have Mater Magic. It's a pretty accurate name. I'm really impressed with this one. So those are just not only tall, but really robust seedlings. Nice big leaves, excellent color. But let's look at that root development. Just really nice. Besides the fact that these desperately need transplanted, these are some beautiful seedlings. Dr. Earth up next. And honestly, for a fertilizer that doesn't have any nitrogen in it, these aren't terrible. They look comparable to the Alaska fish fertilizer. Again, I wish they were a little deeper green, but had I transplanted these at normal time, these would do fine in the garden. Let's look at these roots. You know, I wish I had more roots, but that's perfectly passable. And here are the Espoma seedlings. Now, if you saw that cauliflower test, Those seedlings were so pitiful. It does make me seriously wonder if that batch that I had was bad. These obviously aren't the best, but there is certainly nothing wrong with these seedlings. Again, wish that color was a little darker, but on a normal schedule where I would be transplanting month and a half old seedlings, these would do fine in the garden. They're plenty sturdy. I can see here already we've got decent root development. You know, again, not the best, but nothing wrong with those seedlings. And the Miracle-Gro. You know, with Miracle-Gro, I've mentioned time and again, I'm not a fan of it. I get that people use it for their indoor seedlings because it is cost effective. And when you're in a contained system like this, you're really not risking, harming in any way the soil microbiome. I know a lot of people that fertilize indoor seedlings with Miracle-Gro and then switch to natural fertilizers when they move out to the garden. So yeah, the argument has always been, well, it's cost effective, it's easy to get a hold of. But I mean, these results, I feel like just speak for themselves. Like, why am I even bothering? Because again, they're a little bigger than my control, but the color is about the same as my control. Let's look at this root development. We'll pick the bigger seedling just to give them the benefit of the doubt here. I mean, again, a little better than the control. I'll give it that. But this is a 3-month-old plant. That's pathetic. Sorry, is my disdain for Miracle-Gro showing here? I don't know. For those that use it and have good results with it, more power to you. But I will never be a convert, and I will never recommend that anyone use this crap. We've got 2 more left. This is the Revive RX. These are nice seedlings. Nice. I like the stocky stems. The color's pretty good. Not quite as good and not quite as filled out as the Mater Magic, but let's see here. Let's take a look at the roots. I can see them popping out the bottom. It's nice. A close second to Mater Magic, I'm gonna say. And this formulation, once you break it down per application, is pretty darn affordable. And last but not least, this is the Gardens Alive Seedling Boost. Being another synthetic with a similar formulation to Miracle-Gro, I actually expected the performance to be very, very similar to the Miracle-Gro. Let me show you a comparison here. Here are the 2 Miracle-Gro plants. Here are the Seedling Boost plants. Color, again, like I'm not super thrilled about this. I wish this was a richer green color. Come on. Root development, a little better than Miracle-Gro. But again, I wish I had more to show for a 3-month-old plant here. Now granted, these have only been up potted for a month. Keep that in mind with all these larger seedlings. But let's get a sample of each here and lay them side by side, because I always like seeing the side-by-side comparison. So now let's rank these based on our seedling health and appearance and the root development from worst to best. Number 10, the worst. There's no big surprise here, is our control. And again, this is water only with no fertilizer. Number 9 and 8, really too close to call. I'm gonna say these are basically tied for the same place, is our Miracle-Gro and Neptune's Harvest. But in fairness, if I had applied Neptune every week as per instructed, I'm guessing it would have easily beat the Miracle-Gro. Number 7, Gardens Alive Seedling Boost. Number 6 and 5, these 2 were really close. This was a hard call, but I'm going to say number 6 is Espoma and number 5 is Dr. Earth. In 4th place is our Agro Thrive, and if you recall, this was our cauliflower seedling winner. Tomato seedlings were fine, just not the best of the best here. In 3rd place, Alaska. In 2nd place, Revive RX, and in 1st place, our Mater Magic. So there you have it. Mater Magic is our winner with Revive RX close in second place. I will say with the Mater Magic, if you were to apply this as they instructed and use it on in-ground plants, this would get really pricey. But to use a smaller amount to feed seedlings, as I did here, is fairly economical. So what are my biggest takeaways here? Besides finding 3 new fertilizers to add to my repertoire, the first is that in the case of the Espoma, fertilizers can go bad, or you can just get a bad batch, especially in the case of naturally derived fertilizers. So if you have something that just really smells off, really doesn't perform the way you think that it should, it could be the case that it has gone bad. For me personally, I don't like to, nor do I remember to feed my seedlings every single week. So a big factor for me in choosing my seedling fertilizers are going to be those that don't need to be applied as frequently. That's going to be a personal choice, but you might just take that into consideration when choosing for yourself. I know also there are some folks out there that are adamantly opposed to feeding seedlings at all. And while you may not want tomato seedlings the size of trees, I find that giving them at least a little something does help their success later on in the garden. The biggest thing here is that it allows them to develop a more robust and fully functional root system, which is in turn going to better allow them to efficiently uptake water and nutrients, reduce stress, allow them to more easily overcome transplant shock, and go on to be big, beautiful, productive plants in the garden. I'd ask you to take another look at our poor control seedlings here, with barely any root system to speak of. If you're one of those folks that have never fed their seedlings and they do amazing for you, carry on. But if you don't fertilize your seedlings and they have always seemed to struggle, maybe consider trying one of these that I've tested out, or any other fertilizer for that matter. And probably the most important big takeaway for me is I love doing these kinds of tests. There are always several big surprises for me that I am not expecting when I look at these results. And it ultimately helps me know which fertilizers are worth me investing my money in and which are a waste of money. Next go around, I'd love to test out homemade fertilizers, but I may have to limit this one to 3 or 4 different options. So if you have a favorite homemade fertilizer recipe, drop a line in the comments below and let me know about it. And let me know also what kind of vegetable seedlings you'd like to see tested out in the next go around. If you found today's video helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.